Hi there tonight. We take a muddy, muscle cramping step back into the war tangled world of a medieval English archer, where the air smells faintly of smoke and turnips. Your back hurts before you've even drawn a bow, and everyone is very suspicious of your elbows. Picture it a frosty pre dawn mist curling off the fields like steam from a grumpy kettle. You're standing in a trampled patch of grass that someone optimistically calls a practice yard. Your hands are calloused. Your tunic smells like a sheep's opinion of rain, and your breakfast still stuck in your teeth from last night's barley stew. You blink into the pale light and wonder if your spine has always made that noise. Before you fully sink into your pillow, a quick like and subscribe would mean the world if you're into sleepy stories like this. Got a strange bit of history you want to hear before bed? Drop it in the comments. Tuck yourself in, slow your breathing, and let the past keep you company tonight. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your bow leans against a hay bale beside you, tall, almost as tall as you. A longbow yew wood English grown straight as a pious monk and about as forgiving. You're told it takes years to master. You're fairly certain you're still in year one, despite the fact that you've aged 15 years in the past 6 months. Your fingers ache already. Not from drawing the bow, but from stringing it in the damp. The tension in the stave reminding you that you does not care if your wrist hurts. It will hurt anyway. Around you, others begin to gather. Some still yawning, some already complaining, a few doing both at the same time. One man has straw in his beard. No one mentions it. You shuffle into position. You know the drill line up, brace the bow knock, the arrow draw, hold, release. The thud of arrows hitting the padded target fills the yard like heartbeats. Some strike true. Others glance off, wobbling like drunk ducks. One hits a wooden post with a splintering crack. The shooter groans and mutters something about being cursed by Saint Sebastian himself. Everyone chuckles, nervously. It's mandatory, this archery practice. By royal decree, every able-bodied man must train regularly. War is coming, or always seems like it is, and the king wants fields full of longbows ready to turn into forests of pain. You've heard stories of French knights felled by the hundreds, of arrows so thick they darken the sky, of a field called Crécy where archers stood in the mud and made history with calloused fingers and arms like tree trunks. You pull back again. The string cuts into your fingertips. Your shoulder burns. The arrow flies low but straight. It hits the lower edge of the target and sticks. Barely. You allow yourself the tiniest grunt of pride. The man next to you mutters, "Could have been a squirrel." You nod. A large, angry squirrel. You're improving. Slowly. Painfully. With every draw, your body reshapes itself into something new. Shoulders widen. Back tightens. Fingers lose their softness and gain a strange, satisfying rigidity. You wake with soreness in places you didn't know existed. You also begin to smell like grease-wet wool and faint despair. Lunch is a crust of bread. Maybe cheese. If you're lucky, a dried apple slice that you definitely didn't trade for with a half-usable arrowhead. But let's be honest, you did. The sergeant walks the line, barking critiques and grumbling about posture. "Stand straight like a fence post," he yells at one poor soul who's leaning like a windswept hedge. "Do it again. You keep your shoulders square. You're not the worst. Not anymore." There's always someone newer. Someone who's yet to learn that drawing a longbow is less about strength and more about remembering how much of your day will be spent not being able to lift your arm. Some men here are professionals yeomen, full-time archers who serve lords and train for war as if it's their next meal. Others are farmers roped in by obligation and the promise of coin. You're somewhere in between. Enough talent to be useful. Enough sense to be terrified. The sun rises higher. The dew lifts. The targets are replaced. Straw bales are dragged into position for moving drills. You groan quietly, running and shooting, ducking and drawing, not tripping over your own belt. These are the goals. You sweat, you curse. You hit a target dead center and no one sees it. Typical. One man shoots 3 arrows in 6 seconds. Someone cheers. He promptly misses the next 4. Confidence is dangerous. By mid-afternoon, your arms shake. Your shirt clings. You've restrung your bow twice, and the last time it snarled like it knew better. You collapse beside a water bucket, panting. The bucket smells faintly of turnips. You drink anyway. And as the day ends, you stare at your hands raw red, stronger than yesterday. Could you do this every day? You already are. You look around the yard at the men and boys and weary faces all shaped by string and sweat. No one's smiling, but no one's quitting either. And that you realize is what makes an archer, not the bow, not the arrows, just the strange, stubborn willingness to stand up again tomorrow. That bow, your constant companion, your wooden tormentor, is no mere stick with string. It's longer than your leg, heavier than it looks, and demands your respect in the way a mule demands not to be stared at too long. Today, your arm's already sore from yesterday's training. You're meant to bond with your weapon, which sounds noble until you're wrestling you wood in a damp field before breakfast. Let's take a closer look at this beast, the English longbow. A humble name for something that can punch through armor, split shield planks, and dislocate your shoulder if you draw it wrong. Your longbow yew wood, of course, is over 6 feet tall. A self-bow, meaning it's made from one piece of wood, expertly crafted with the sapwood on the outside flexible, and the heartwood on the inside stubborn and murderous. It's a blend of grace and violence, and it's taller than most people in your village, including the elder who claims he met Merlin's cousin once. When strung, your bow curves slightly like it's raising an eyebrow at you. It takes both strength and technique just to string it without giving yourself a surprise trip to the ground. You brace one end against your foot, bend the other gently, no, not like that, and slip the string over the horn knock. If you hear a crack, it's either the bow or your rib. Try again. Draw weight. Well, yours is probably around 100 pounds. Some go higher. 120, even 150 for military bows. That's not pull this like a gym rope. That's pull this with your entire body and prepare to meet pain. There's a reason your right shoulder is starting to look like it belongs to someone who lifts ox carts for fun. You draw the bow again, standing in the yard, feet apart, breath shallow. Feel the tension. The way it hums like it's alive. The way the bowstring creaks under pressure. The slight tremble in your fingers. The way your biceps complain in Middle English, and then release. The arrow flies. You squint to follow its arc. It thunks into the straw. A decent hit. You nod like you meant it. A small cheer from the younger lads. You feel taller. That's the magic of the longbow. It's not just about killing power, though. Yes, it can do that at 200 yards with terrifying accuracy. It's about presence. Poise. The way it makes you feel like you could take down a knight or a goose or the whole concept of tyranny in one shot. And you might be wondering why you is sacred. Long considered a symbol of death and eternal life, often planted in churchyards, sometimes used to make charms or poisons. And when carved right, it's the perfect mix of elasticity and strength. But it's also fussy. The wrong cut and your bow might snap in the cold. Or worse, in the middle of battle. You've named yours, haven't you? Everyone does. Not aloud, of course. That's how curses happen. But in your head, it's not just a bow. It's company. A wooden comrade. You talk to it when no one is around. You apologize when you miss. You threaten it when it misbehaves. You're not sure it listens, but sometimes it forgives you anyway. The arrows are a whole world of their own, each one hand-fletched, tipped with steel, and stored in your linen quiver. Broadheads for armor, bodkins for flesh, Fire arrows if you're feeling dramatic. You keep your arrows dry, sharp, and jealous. No borrowing, no trading. That's a quick way to end up with splinters and regret. There's a myth that the longbow was so feared, so powerful, that it was outlawed by some kings on pain of death. That's not quite true, but the fear, that's real. Historians still argue whether the longbow's dominance came from its design or its users. Was it the bow itself, or the brutal training required to wield it well? Did it win battles, or was it just the most visible part of a much messier war machine? Either way, you're a part of that machine now. Your spine agrees. You think about those famous battles, Crécy, Poitiers, Agincourt. You've heard the tales. Lines of archers hundreds strong, arrows flying so thick they blot out the sun, knights charging into a wall of pointed death. But they don't tell you about the practice. The bruised fingers, the torn shoulders, the nights you can't lift a spoon without wincing, the guilt of a misfire, the fear of battle not as legend, but as mud screams and trying to find your arrows in a body-strewn field. You draw the bow again, hold, breathe, release, hit. Another small win. You unstring the bow and cradle it like something fragile. It's not, but you are. Back at your hut, you hang the bow carefully near the fire to keep the damp away. You oil it with tallow and whisper your thanks, just in case. This thing is more than a weapon. It's your profession, your identity, your burden. And tomorrow you'll carry it again. Your shoulders still ache from yesterday's drawing drills, and your fingers feel like they've been pinched by small medieval goblins. But the sun is up, the sergeant is shouting again, and your bow is leaning expectantly against the practice post, like it didn't spend all night plotting new ways to dislocate your shoulder. Welcome back to training. Today the drills start before your brain finishes waking up. You're told to line up for form correction. That sounds gentle, almost relaxing. It is not. It involves being barked at for how you hold your spine, the angle of your elbow, and the way your left foot looks cowardly. You try not to take it personally. Everyone's left foot gets called names at some point. You stand, you draw, you hold. This time the sergeant walks past squinting. He says, almost symmetrical. You beam internally. Then he adds like a duck preparing to fall over. You sigh. You do it again. You spend the morning repeating the draw-hold-release cycle. Over and over. Arrows thud into straw. Some bounce off with sad flutters. Your wrist starts to buzz with that familiar dull ache, the kind that says, you're doing it right, but your tendons hate you. Next comes the finger drill. You wear a small leather tab on your drawing hand, sometimes called a shooting glove, but really just a medieval way of delaying permanent nerve damage. You rub beeswax into it, trying to soften it up as your fingertips throb from yesterday's practice. You're told to draw and hold, not release, just hold. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Your back starts to shake. Don't let it drop. Someone yells, which is helpful in the way that being yelled at during a sneeze is helpful. You breathe, you hold. Finally release. The arrow zips off like it's late for a battle. It misses the target, but at this point, that feels irrelevant. You slump. The sergeant nods. Better, he says, which is the closest thing to a compliment he's given since Lent. Around you, others fumble. One young lad snaps his string and nearly takes out a bystander's hat. The older archers chuckle and offer advice. Don't pull like you're trying to milk a goat, useful, if oddly specific. During a break, you sit in the grass hands, trembling slightly. You flex your fingers, examining the ridges forming along your fingertips. You didn't have these a month ago. Now they're like little calloused badges of honor and minor inconvenience during meals. Next up, stance correction. This involves walking heel to toe across a board while holding your bow above your head. For balance, you're told. For humility, you suspect. You wobble like a sleep-deprived flamingo and nearly topple into the weapon rack. The flamingo would have had better posture. Lunch is dried beans and a hunk of bread so tough it might double as a shield in a pinch. You gnaw slowly, appreciating the way your jaw now aches too, just to keep things consistent. As you chew, you overhear two archers debating whether it's better to build finger strength with sandbags or by just suffering through the pain. The third suggests swearing creatively at your bow helps the rhythm, he claims. Later, it's time for posture drills. You're told to draw the bow while standing on uneven ground rocks, clumps of grass, a patch of earth that smells suspiciously of horse. This is meant to prepare you for battlefield conditions. It succeeds in preparing you for twisted ankles and one particularly comedic tumble. You draw again. Your breath catches. The bow feels heavier today. Or maybe your arms are just staging a rebellion. You release. The arrow hits not the center, not even the target, but something at least in the vicinity of your aim. You nod. You're calling it a win. The sergeant claps once. Field drills tomorrow, he says. Less straw, more mud. You don't know whether to groan or celebrate. As you trudge home, bow slung over your shoulder, you pass by a group of children play fighting with sticks. One of them mimics a draw standing lopsided but determined. You smile. You were that child once. Now you're a little older, a little sorer, and a lot sweatier. You soak your hands in cold water. The sting is sharp, but then it fades. Historians still argue whether this training regime was sustainable for the average peasant conscript, or if it was mainly endured by a dedicated yeoman class. What's certain, it was brutal, consistent, and left a mark on your muscles, your bones, and eventually history. You oil your bow, lay it down with care. You stretch your fingers, they crack audibly. You sigh with deep satisfaction or exhaustion, or both. And just before you sleep, you flex your hand, miming the draw one more time. Because even if your body forgets by morning, your muscles will remember, and you'll do it all again tomorrow. By the time the sun is up, your fingers are stiff, your shoulders hum with dull protest, and your stomach makes noises that could scare away most woodland creatures. You don't wake hungry, you wake already behind. Being a medieval archer isn't just about skill and blisters, it's about fuel. And the fuel isn't glamorous or tasty, or frankly satisfying in any meaningful way. Welcome to the gritty breakfast realities of a working longbowman. You shuffle to the hearth where last night's coals still smolder. You nudge them back to life with a stick, add a few dried twigs and blow. Smoke curls into your face. Your eyes sting. You blink and swear softly, which given the setting is more likely to summon a peasant's pity than divine wrath. Your provisions. A cloth-wrapped lump of yesterday's oat porridge congealed into something that defies classification. You slice it into chunks and heat it in a pan slicked with lard. It hisses like it knows what's coming. You add a pinch of salt luxurious and a curl of onion if you've got one. This is gourmet now. You chew slowly. The texture is stubborn. The flavor is slightly less sad than yesterday, but it fills your stomach. Mostly, and that's what counts. Food for an archer is all about function. You need calories, lots of them. Drawing a bow that's over 6 feet long with 100+ pounds of pull weight isn't a hobby, it's a full-body workout every time. You burn through meals like your limbs are tiny blacksmiths hammering away inside you. But your diet doesn't care. It's porridge, it's bread, it's stew, again and again. If you're lucky, there's cheese. If you're really lucky, it hasn't turned blue yet. Some mornings there's ale, a weak, barely fermented brew that tastes like bread's damp cousin, but gets the job done. Water isn't always safe, and ale gives you calories and plausible deniability when you forget where you put your arrow bundle. Later, if you're serving under a wealthy lord or during a campaign, you might get dried fish. Salted so thoroughly it could preserve secrets. Or beef jerky, which doubles as a chewing test. A chicken rare. A pie rumor. Fruit only if you're willing to fight bees and fate. You overhear a fellow archer brag that once after a skirmish he found a smoked eel. It looked at me funny, he said, but I ate it anyway. Lunch is usually whatever fits in a cloth bag and won't spoil by midday. You keep a bit of rye bread tucked into your belt pouch. It's hard, crumbly, tastes vaguely of sorrow, but it doesn't crumble entirely in your hand, and it won't poison you. Probably. You also carry dried beans, peas, sometimes lentils. Things that once boiled become soft enough to chew, but never flavorful enough to write home about. Not that many archers write home. Dinner when it comes is a pot shared by many, a stew bubbling slowly over a smoky fire. It contains water onions, maybe root vegetables if in season, and a chunk of meat so stringy that the string might be more digestible. Still, when you're cold and sore and the fire's warm, even bad stew tastes like comfort. The communal pot also serves as gossip central. Who missed a shot? Who's flirting with the tanner's daughter? Who may have accidentally fired an arrow into the latrine wall twice? Historians still argue whether the typical medieval archer had consistent access to meat, or if most campaigns involved near-constant food shortages offset only by foraging and pilfering. Most agree nutrition was basic. The longbow didn't just take strength, it slowly took strength. Malnutrition is a quiet companion in this life. Your fingernails chip easily, your joints crackle when you stand. You try not to think about the friend who got scurvy and started craving tree bark. You think he was joking. Probably. And yet you persist. You carry a small pouch of salt precious stuff. You've traded arrows for it, bartered favors, risked a mild scolding. Because a pinch of salt turns stew into something edible. Almost. You once tasted honey at a fair. Just a dab on a crust of bread. It was so sweet it made your eyes water. You dream of it sometimes, less like food, more like a spell. You finish your morning meal. You pack the rest into a wrapped cloth your field meal. Today will be long. You'll eat again when the sun is high if the sergeant remembers, or if you sneak a break behind the cart where no one notices you pretending to inspect the arrowheads. Your body craves more than you can give it, but it adapts. Slowly, stubbornly, like a tree leaning into wind. You get used to hunger like you get used to the ache in your bow arm. It's always there. You just make room for it. Still, sometimes on a rare rest day, you sit by the fire, close your eyes, and imagine a meal not built for function but for joy. Meat roasted on a spit. A fresh loaf with honey. A warm mug of something spiced. No stew, no oats, no apologies. You open your eyes. The fire crackles. Someone passes you a bit of bread. It's stale, it's rough, but it's yours. After a hearty breakfast of disappointment and lukewarm barley, you prepare for another day of archery practice. But before you can even think about your bowstring tension or which fingers will blister next, you face your next challenge getting dressed. Let's talk medieval archer fashion, or more accurately survival gear, disguised as fashion's frumpy cousin. You begin as always with the base layer, the linen shift. It's your undergarment, your sleepwear, your sweat rag, your everything. It's not glamorous, it's not particularly flattering, and after a few days of wear it smells like it's been worn under armor during a thunderstorm. Because it has. Over that you throw on your braze a sort of medieval boxer short situation, loose tied at the waist and constantly threatening to slide down if you didn't knot it properly. They're designed for movement, but occasionally feel like they're designed to embarrass you in front of your entire archery unit. Then comes the tunic. You own two. Maybe. One's stained from stew duty, the other from what you swear was a goose-related incident. Today you choose the lesser of two smells. The tunic hangs to mid-thigh and is belted with a length of rope that once secured a sack of onions. You tie it with a flourish that fools no one. On colder days, you layer a woolen over-tunic, dyed with whatever color the local plants could produce, usually murky green, brownish brown, or possibly was once red. Your legs covered by hose. Not modern leggings. These are two individual wool tubes tied to your belt or stitched to your brace, and they like to sag at the worst possible moment. You walk carefully like a man negotiating with his own trousers. Shoes. Ah, yes, the medieval archer's eternal foe. You wear turn shoes soft-soled leather that mold to your feet like polite snakes and offer the same arch support as a damp sock. The soles are thin, the stitching rough, and the moment you step on a rock, you're reminded that your boots were made for walking but not for comfort. To protect your feet, you stuff in straw, or wool scraps, or prayers, mostly prayers. Now comes the gear your bracer, a stiff leather arm guard to protect your left forearm from the wrath of your bowstring. Forget to wear it, and you'll walk around with a welt that looks like you lost a fight with a whip. You tie the bracer with thin cords and flex your arm. It creaks, you nod, it's functional, possibly cursed. Around your waist, a belt holds your knife pouch and quiver loop. You tighten it just enough to keep your hose from staging a rebellion, but loose enough that you can still breathe. Your quiver, usually leather or cloth, is slung across your back or side, depending on preference and how many arrows you're willing to lose to gravity. You've tried both positions. Neither is perfect. You compromise with a half-broken sling that squeaks when you move too quickly. Historians still argue whether archers wore armor in battle. Some say yes, at least a padded jack or leather coat. Others say no mobility mattered more than protection. You've seen both. When armor is issued, it's usually the sort that smells like damp ferret and pinches your ribs every time you sneeze. Today you go without. It's just a training day after all. But you do strap on your hood a woolen pullover cowl with a pointy tip that makes you look vaguely like a duck trying to keep warm. It shields your neck from the sun and your ears from the sergeant shouting. Barely. And gloves. Optional. But you wear them when you can fingerless leather stiff at the joints patched with wax and luck. They keep the string from biting into your palm and give you an air of rugged mystery. At least that's what you tell yourself. You inspect your reflection in a puddle. You look like an archer. A slightly rumpled, mildly damp, definitely blistered archer. Your clothes are stained, your shoes are tired, and your belt has been knotted and reknotted so many times it now tells fortunes. But it works. Everything you wear has a purpose, even if it occasionally shifts, sags, scratches, or smells. As you step into the field, the sergeant gives you a once-over. At least you're not naked, he mutters. High praise. You notch an arrow, adjusting your bracer as the string grazes your wrist. You draw, you shoot, you breathe. You're uncomfortable, but prepared. Your clothes won't win any medals, but they'll keep you dry-ish, warmish, and functional enough to draw your bow run across mud and trip only slightly less than usual, which in your line of work is considered couture. Today you wake with a twinge behind your right eye and a dull throb in your back that wasn't there yesterday. Or maybe it was. Everything sort of hurts now in soft rotation. You stretch slowly, creaking like a tree, and sit up blinking against the early morning haze. Your mouth tastes like old bread and wool, which is fair because you fell asleep chewing bread wearing wool. Your shoulder, the bow arm one, complains again. A reminder that while you've survived the drills, you've been building an injury collection worthy of its own shrine. Time perhaps to visit the medic. You don't go to a hospital. There is no hospital. You go to the man with the knives and the vinegar, also known as the camp surgeon. He's set up on the edge of the practice yard beneath a crooked canvas lean-to that smells strongly of garlic-boiled leather and quiet dread. His tools sit in a rolled-up cloth on the table, forceps, scalpels, hooks, and one thing that looks suspiciously like a melon baller. You're not sure what he uses it for, and you will not ask. Shoulder pain, he says, not looking up. You nod. He grunts and gestures to a bench. You sit. Draw the bow. You nod again. He grunts louder, always the bow shoulder. He begins poking at your muscles, grumbling about inflammation and humors. Then he pulls out a jar of thick, greenish goo that smells like basil and bad decisions. He smears it generously across your skin while muttering about balanced bile and the alignment of the stars. Leeches he offers casually. You politely decline. He shrugs and instead gives you a leather strap to bite while he jabs his thumb into a knotted muscle that has very strong opinions about being touched. You nearly fall off the bench. He says this is a good sign. You're unconvinced. He wraps your shoulder with a strip of cloth dipped in vinegar and sage, then hands you a dried root and tells you to chew it until the pain confesses its sins. You leave slightly greasy and unsure if you've been healed or marinated. In the camp, medicine is part science, part superstition, and part guessing. For a toothache, you're advised to stuff a clove under your lip. For headaches, it's chamomile. For a persistent cough, boiled onion and honey, though you're not sure if it cures the cough or just distracts you from it. You meet a fellow archer nursing a swollen finger. He says the surgeon told him to sleep with garlic in his sock. He's not sure why. Probably keeps the ghosts out, he says cheerfully. Injury is common. Archers train hard. Muscles tear. Fingers split back, seize up. You see a boy with a bandaged wrist too green to know that bracing your bow on wet ground invites the wrath of slippery souls and gravity. He'll heal, probably, but not all wounds are from training. There are scars here, thin, jagged ones across arms, legs, shoulders, from past skirmishes, from battlefield panics, from that one time someone tripped over a pot while cleaning arrows and nearly took out a foot. And yet formal treatment is rare. No antiseptic. No stitches unless someone's feeling bold. No painkillers unless you count strong ale or biting a stick. You once saw a man get a dislocated shoulder fixed by being yanked backward by two other men and then slapped on the back. It worked. He screamed, then drank for 3 days. Historians still argue how effective medieval medical practices really were. Some say they were dangerously primitive. Others argue that considering the tools and knowledge outcomes weren't as grim as we imagine. Either way, you learn quickly prevention is preferable. So you stretch. You oil your bow. You warm up before practice. You don't lift things that look heavier than your sense of pride. Still, things go wrong. An archer collapses after a fever. No one's sure if it's from bad stew, bad luck, or a blessing in reverse. The surgeon bleeds him with a small blade in a bowl, hoping to rebalance his humors. You try not to watch. You definitely try not to be next. For stomach issues, it's mint wormwood or prayers, sometimes all three. You once spent a full night lying on your side, clutching your ribs, swearing never to eat campfish again. You made that promise twice. You've already broken it once. You carry a small pouch. Now herbs, salt, dried mint leaves. Not because you know what you're doing, but because carrying them feels like you might be doing something. And in a world of aching joints and mystery fevers that counts, the surgeon tells you to come back in 2 days. If the pain returns, he says we try honey and hot stones. You're not sure if that's a treatment or a medieval dessert. Back in camp, someone asks if you've been cursed. You say probably. You sit near the fire shoulder, throbbing in rhythm with your heartbeat, and start chewing the root. It tastes like wood and resentment, but slowly, slowly the ache dulls. Or maybe you just forget about it while trying not to gag. You watch your fellow archers polish their arrowheads, stretch their bowstrings, sip their broth. Everyone's sore. Everyone's limping slightly. Everyone's pretending not to notice. You smile, because being an archer doesn't mean being pain-free. It means learning how to keep shooting anyway. Your shoulder is tightly wrapped in vinegar-soaked linen. Your fingers are cracked just enough to sting when you dip them in water, and your quiver smells like onions. Again. But today there's no archery practice, no drills, no posture correction, no bruised pride from a wayward arrow. And somehow that's worse. Because today you're reminded you're not just a soldier, you're a laborer, a beast of burden with a bow. And someone decided the best use of your talents right now is to dig a ditch. You blink at the sergeant expecting a punchline. There is none, just a shovel and a frown. You take the shovel. This isn't trench warfare. This is drainage. A slow, tedious gouge in the earth to prevent camp from turning into a bog the moment it rains, which it will probably in about an hour because the clouds overhead have gathered like angry sheep. The ground is hard, then suddenly soft, then full of rocks. Each shovelful resists like the dirt itself is offended to be disturbed. You sweat. Your shoulder reminds you that it was not consulted about this assignment. Your back mumbles something rude in Latin. Your fellow archers dig too. Some complain. Others hum tuneless songs. One man claims he once saw a ditch so deep it touched the devil's toenail. No one responds. When you pause to catch your breath, the sergeant appears like a sweat-summoning ghost. Still breathing, he asks. You nod. He points to a spot that looks identical to the one you just finished. That section's jealous. You dig, but ditch digging is just one flavor of your non-combat duties. Later, you're sent to gather firewood. Sounds simple, isn't? You trudge into the woods with a sack and a hatchet. You collect branches, twigs, anything vaguely burnable. You start talking to the trees mostly out of boredom, partly out of suspicion. The trees don't answer. That's probably for the best. Then it's errand running. The sergeant's boot is splitting, and you're sent to the camp cobbler with a note and a scowl. The cobbler is half blind, sings to his leather, and insists on showing you the shoe he once made for a bishop. You pretend to be impressed. You return with a mended boot and a small welt from the cobbler's awl. Don't ask. Then you're assigned sheep duty. Not guarding sheep, watching them. No explanation. You sit near a small pen staring at woolly blobs who stare back with the blank indifference of creatures that fear neither man nor God. One of them bleats with what sounds like sarcasm. You resist the urge to respond. The sheep continue to exist. You consider taking up philosophy. During lunch, someone tries to cheer you up by saying that Edward the III himself probably dug a ditch once. You're skeptical, but you nod. After your meal bread again, but with a suspicious smear of something claiming to be cheese, you're ordered to help the quartermaster organize supplies. You count arrows, Polish arrowheads, repack flour sacks. Try not to sneeze from all the dust. Try not to laugh when you discover a bag labeled important rocks. No one explains what that means. You end the day carrying water buckets from the well to the cook fire. The buckets are heavy. Your fingers slip. The path is muddy. You splash one bucket down your leg. Now you're wet and thirsty and not entirely sure if this counts as progress. And still there's more. You help the scribe copy an inventory list. He lets you sharpen his quill and dip ink while he mutters about misplaced potatoes and phantom cheese. You ask if he was ever an archer. He blinks. Once, he says. Then I learned to write. You begin to reconsider your life choices. Historians still argue whether archers were treated more like elite troops or common laborers when not in battle. The answer? Probably both. Archery was specialized, but bows didn't need constant shooting, and idle hands in a medieval camp. That's how fires get started, literally. So you're kept busy, always. Some days you're sent to fetch wine. Other days you repair tents. Once you were ordered to chase off crows from the drying meat rack. The crows did not respect you. One made a noise that might have been laughter. Still, there's a rhythm to it. Your hands become accustomed to work that doesn't involve a bowstring. Your mind wanders less. Your body bruised bent. Begrudging settles into its new routine. And at night, when you finally sit by the fire eating stew you didn't cook, but somehow still blame for tasting like boiled sock, you realize something. You're not just an archer. You're a man who digs ditches, counts arrows, polishes boots, carries water, chases birds, and somehow all of that matters. Because when the war comes, and it always does, it won't just be arrows that keep you alive. It'll be the strength in your hands, the patience in your back, and the quiet knowledge that you've already done the hard work. The morning begins with shouting. Not unusual, but today it carries that particular urgency that means one of two things. Either someone accidentally set fire to the cook tent again, or more likely you're moving out. You don't need a formal announcement. You feel it in the way people rush to pack in the muttered curses, in the way the sergeant's voice sounds more clipped than usual. Someone hurls a bundle of arrows into a cart. Another yells something about a missing belt. You eat breakfast standing up. Bread naturally. A piece of cold meat you think used to be pork. It tastes like regret. You chew anyway, and then it's time to go. To war, eventually, which means marching. You hoist your pack, a lumpy canvas thing filled with not enough of what you need and too much of what you don't, and fall in with your unit. Your bow is slung across your back, your quiver tight against your hip. You feel the weight of it all settle into your bones like wet wool. The first steps are the easiest. Then your boots remember they were stitched by someone who hates arches. You begin to feel every pebble, every rut in the road, every insult to your heels. You adjust your stride, you adjust again. You consider just walking backward. The sergeant would not approve. The march isn't fast. It's not glorious either. It's just long. The road winds through fields still damp from last night's rain. Sheep bleat in the distance. Birds overhead look smug. You try to focus on the scenery, but mostly you watch the feet of the man in front of you and pray he doesn't stop suddenly. Around midday, you break for water. A stream trickles nearby, clear enough to drink after a quick prayer to every clean water god you can remember. Your shoulders ache. You rotate them once, twice. It doesn't help. Lunch is eaten in silence, dried beans, a crust of bread, a bite of sour apple. You consider chewing with your eyes closed just to trick your brain into thinking it's fancy. Then you're moving again. The road climbs. Someone starts singing. A marching song. Off-key but enthusiastic. You join in on the chorus mostly because it keeps you from thinking about your thighs. By the time the sun tilts westward, you've passed through 2 villages. Children stare. One offers you a flower, another throws a pebble. You thank the first glare at the second and keep walking. Finally camp. You arrive at a field that's more puddle than pasture. The order is given, set up. You pitch your tent. It's not so much a tent as a collection of damp fabric and misplaced optimism. It leans slightly, but you don't care. You throw down your pack, peel off your boots, and wiggle your toes with the intensity of someone rediscovering sensation. Then comes the work. Fires need building. Food needs boiling. Watch posts must be assigned. You're handed a bundle of dry twigs and told to make them less dry. You do your best. Mostly you breathe on them and hope for a miracle. Dinner is stew again, and you eat it huddled close to the fire bowl cupped in your hands like treasure. It burns your tongue and still somehow tastes like undercooked cabbage. You mutter thanks anyway. Someone asks if you're ready. Ready for what's next? The battle? The real part. You shrug. Say something about as ready as stew and boots can make me. He laughs. It's not a happy laugh. Before bed, you check your bow. You unstring it carefully, rubbing it down with a cloth to keep the damp away. You count your arrows, touch each one, retighten the bindings. This is your ritual, your reassurance. Sleep comes slowly. The ground is lumpy. The air is cold. Your cloak doesn't quite reach your ankles. You curl up, trying to ignore the man snoring beside you and the faint drip drip of a leak in the tent seam. It hits your forehead every 4 seconds. You wonder where the enemy is, how far, how many, whether they're eating stew too. Historians still argue whether these slow marches did more to harden soldiers than battle ever did. Whether the boredom, the blisters, the endless damp built something inside you, patience maybe, or just numbness. You wake before dawn not because anyone calls you, but because your body has started its own rebellion. Your hips hurt, your neck cricks, your toes are damp. You sit up, stretch, and listen. Birdsong, a pot boiling, the soft creak of leather, and somewhere beyond the trees, the kind of silence that means someone's watching. Not yet battle, but close. You lace your boots, cinch your belt, and shoulder your bow. To war eventually. But first another step. Another mile, another day. You wake in mud. Not dramatic mud, not battlefield mud. Just the kind that seeps into your tunic while you sleep and makes your skin feel like it's been slow roasted in a puddle. Your tent has slumped slightly in the night. Your cloak is damp. Your right boot is suspiciously squishy. This is resting during a campaign. You sit up, blink at the gray morning sky, and try to remember a time when you didn't have a pine needle stuck to your ear. Your back cracks. Your shoulder groans. Your stomach, loyal as ever, demands answers. Breakfast is thin gruel from a pot that's seen too many fires and too few cleanings. You eat it with a carved spoon that used to belong to someone named Wolf, the name still notched into the handle. No one knows what happened to Wolf. You don't ask. Around you, the camp stirs. Men emerge from tents like disgruntled turtles. Armor is fastened. Bows are checked. Arrows are counted, recounted, and immediately misplaced. Someone sneezes and curses the wind. Someone else tries to light a fire with flint and optimism. It fails. There's no plan today, or rather the plan is to wait for orders, for scouts, for something to happen, which means more waiting. You spend the morning trying to dry your socks near the fire without setting them on fire. You lose one to an unexpected breeze and a poorly placed ember. It smolders, you sigh. You walk the perimeter of the camp. The sentries nod. You nod back. You wonder if anyone ever gets used to standing still for hours while imagining every bush is a soldier. You try to rest, but sleep won't come. The ground is too cold, your thoughts too loud. So you mend gear. You sharpen your arrows with a whetstone that's almost worn smooth. You check the fletching, some are fraying from damp and use. You bind one with thread. Another needs a new head. You trade a crust of bread to a smith's boy in exchange for one that's only slightly bent. These tasks matter. When battle comes and you can feel it humming in the distance, you won't have time to wonder if your arrows are true. You oil your bow once, twice, watching the yew drink in the moisture. You run your fingers along the stave. No cracks. Good. You flex your shoulders. Less good. Nearby, a group of younger lads practices drawing without arrows. The motion over and over. Muscle memory. They whisper to each other, laugh too loud, and get shushed by an older archer who glares like he invented discipline. You eat a midday meal of dried peas and hard bread. You dunk the bread in water to soften it. It doesn't help. After someone suggests a game of dice, you join. You win 2 buttons and half a candle. You lose a piece of soap and most of your pride. The man who beats you says it's lucky. You say nothing, but the soap stings your ego. Then word from the scouts. An enemy patrol nearby, maybe a skirmish soon. The camp reacts, but not with panic, just motion. Arrows are laid out. Armor is checked. Fires are doused. Voices lower. Laughter fades. You ready your gear. Check your quiver. Wrap your fingers. Tie your bracer tighter. You don't know if you'll march out today or tomorrow, but the shift in the air says soon. Evening falls. The clouds roll in. Rain drips softly through the trees. The campfire smells like wet socks and burned stew. You sit with your unit shoulders hunched, each man pretending not to be listening for footsteps beyond the dark. Someone tells a story, an old tale of an archer who could shoot the flame off a candle at 100 yards. No one believes it. Everyone wishes it were true. You lie down on damp straw, your bow beside you wrapped in cloth. Sleep when it comes is shallow. You dream of drawing, of aiming, of arrows that fly forever and never land. Historians still argue whether these nights between marches, these breathless, damp, quiet waits, were the hardest part. Not the battles, but the not knowing. The soft grind of hours that stretch too far. You wake in the middle of the night to silence. Not quiet. True silence. Even the rain has stopped. You grip your bow. You wait. Not because anything's coming yet, but because it will. And you'll need to be ready, even if your socks are still wet. Dawn rolls in slowly, pale and damp like an afterthought. You stretch beneath your cloak eye's gritty shoulder, already aching in anticipation of what the day might demand. The camp buzzes low and anxious. Word has come you'll move soon. No more drills, no more waiting. It's almost time to fight. Which means today you're counting arrows. Again, not because you're a perfectionist, because arrows are life. And losing one means more than just disappointment. It means a trip back through muck smoke and maybe enemy fire to find the stubborn thing before someone else does. Arrows, it turns out, are valuable. Not just because they kill, but because they take time. Labor, materials, they aren't endless. Each one is crafted carefully, shafts of ash or birch, straight and smooth, fletched with goose feathers tipped with steel. Some are bodkins, long and narrow, designed to punch through chainmail or the gaps in plate. Others are broadheads, wide cruel, meant for flesh and bone. Your quiver holds about 24. Before battle, you'll get more, maybe 40 total, bundled in waxed canvas or leather tubes. You carry them tightly slung over your hip or back, arranged so you can reach them by feel alone. And once they're gone, unless you go get them. Today, your unit is tasked with recovering arrows from a mock skirmish held in a nearby clearing. Training, they call it. You call it cleaning up the forest. You tromp through damp leaves and trampled grass, eyes sharp for flashes of feather or metal. It's like treasure hunting, but with the added bonus of splinters and the occasional rabbit hole ambush. You find one lodged in a tree stump, another wedged between two stones. One is bent useless, but you take it anyway. The smith can reforge the head. Maybe. Nearby, another archer curses as he tries to tug an arrow free from a patch of sticky clay. You offer help. He refuses. Pride wins again. By midday, your hands are muddy, your knees soaked, and your haul sits in a burlap sack that smells like old turnips. 20 arrows, more or less. A few damaged, a couple questionable. Still better than nothing. The sergeant inspects your finds, grunts, nods. Keep them sharp, he mutters, and don't waste them. You nod. Of course not. But the truth is, in battle, arrows are lost. Aimed into the wind, buried in enemies, or earth shattered against shields. Some sink into the mud and disappear forever like memories. Some are stolen, reused by the other side if they're clever enough. You've heard stories of archers racing out mid-battle to retrieve spent shafts. Brave, foolish, desperate. All three. And sometimes after the fight, when the field is still and quiet, you comb the ground for any arrow that might still be yours. It's like searching for needles in a field of ghosts. You remember a man who once carved a mark into each of his shafts, a tiny H near the nock. Said it made them easier to find. You asked if it worked. He said he only got 2 back, but I knew they were mine. Historians still argue about how many arrows an average English archer could shoot in battle. Some say 10 per minute. Others scoff at the idea. In training, sure. In the chaos of war, your guess is as good as anyone's. What you do know is this: it goes fast. You blink and you've loosed 5. You blink again and your quiver's empty. Your fingers burn, your bowstring sags. The air is thick with smoke and shouting, and suddenly those 2 extra arrows you stashed in your boot seem like genius. So you count, you prepare, you hoard. You check your arrows again before sunset. Straightness, fletching, tips. You use a whetstone to hone the bodkins to a whisper-fine edge. You test the grip of your fingers. You run a cloth down your bow even though it's already clean, just to be sure. Nearby, a younger archer asks you how many arrows he'll need. You don't answer directly. You say as many as you can carry, and more than that. He nods like he understands. He doesn't. Not yet. Dinner is quiet. The stew is better tonight, thicker with something that might be barley or might be old turnip. You eat slowly, turning 1 arrow over in your hand. It catches the firelight just so, looks elegant, dangerous, brief. Because every arrow you make, carry, shoot, each one could be the difference between walking home or not. You wrap your bundle in cloth, tie it tight, and sleep with it close. Not for comfort, for necessity. You dream of fletched wings, of whistling air, of shafts flying faster than thought, of arrows returning to your hand unbroken, unbent. They never do. You wake to the clink of armor and the soft hiss of boots stepping through wet grass. The sergeant's voice is quieter than usual. That's how you know today's different. Today is battle, or something close to it. You eat your bread without tasting it. Drink your ale without feeling it. You check your bowstring 3 times and run your thumb along your arrows until the tips whisper back. Then you gather with your unit heart thudding like a second drum. The orders are given. A skirmish ahead, small force, they say. Not a full battle, not yet. Just a forward clash, an opening note. You march out at first light, the world still blue and drowsy. Your feet move automatically. Your eyes flick to the trees, to the horizon, to your comrades, each walking like they've forgotten how to blink. It's quiet, too quiet. When you arrive, you're led to the high ground, a gentle slope above a thin stretch of field. Your sergeant barks quick orders. Set your stance, knock ready, wait. So you wait, and then they come. You see them before you hear them. A glint of helmets through the trees, the shimmer of shields, horses snorting, stamping. They line up across the field just close enough to make your stomach twist. You count your arrows. You grip your bow. And then loose. The sky fills. Arrows arc like a flock of dark birds. They rise, hover, and fall, beautiful, terrible. You knock again, draw, loose. Again. And again. You find rhythm in the motion. In the creak of your bow, the hum of the string, the gasp of wind as the arrow flies. Then comes the chaos. You hear shouting. Steel, a trumpet maybe. You keep firing. You don't aim at faces. You aim at movement, at openings, at shapes that might be men or horses or bad luck. Your shoulder begins to burn. Your fingers start to slip. You clench harder. You see one arrow punch through a shield. Another skips off a helmet. One lands in the dirt and sticks upright, a silent flag. And then someone shouts, "Hold fire." You freeze bow halfway drawn. The field is a mess of motion and mud. The enemy retreats staggered bent. Your side cheers. Some laugh giddy with adrenaline. Others sit down hard trembling. You don't cheer. You start counting arrows. 12 left. You had 40. You look across the field and see the ones you fired. Some buried, some broken, some gone. You see one of yours in the thigh of a fallen man. He's not moving. You look away. You sling your bow and head out with the retrieval crew. Arrows are precious. Each one must come back if possible. You walk the field, boots squelching in blood-soaked mud. You pull arrows from the ground. from shields, from the quiet. One man you don't recognize is kneeling staring at the sky. You check, he's not breathing, you take the arrow beside him anyway. Historians still argue about the psychological toll of massed archery, how it felt to kill from a distance to never see the eyes of the man you struck. Was it easier or just different? You don't feel triumphant. You feel tired. Your arms shake, your back aches. But your arrows are mostly recovered. Back at camp, you clean your bow first, then your hands, then your thoughts. The stew tastes like ash. You eat it anyway. You sit by the fire with others who fought beside you. No one speaks for a while. Finally, someone says we did well. Someone else nods. You don't reply. You're already counting what you lost and what you'll need to replace. You fall asleep with your bow beside you. And in your dreams, the arrows never miss. But they never come back either. You wake with mud on your cheek, smoke in your nose, and the sharp reminder in your joints that yesterday was no dream. You stretch slowly, listening to each vertebra protest. Outside your tent, the camp murmurs with the strange stillness that follows violence, not peace, just pause. Your boots are stiff with dried grime. You slide them on anyway. The sky is gray and the breeze carries the scent of spent firewood and singed hair. You recognize the smell. Victory, or something like it. No full-scale battle happened, just a skirmish. But it was enough. You walk into the field where it unfolded, now picked over by scavengers and stretcher-bearers. The grass is flattened. Arrows still protrude from the ground like wheat stalks most already gathered. You pick up a snapped shaft and run your thumb along the splinter. Yours maybe, maybe not. It doesn't matter now. Maybe not. Back at camp, someone sharpens his knife with unnecessary force. Another hums a lullaby while patching a torn tunic. You count these reactions like inventory. Everyone copes differently. You clean your gear. Your bow is already wiped down, but you do it again. Out of habit, out of control. The repetition calms you. Even the string creaks like it's sighing with you. Around the fire, a few men laugh too loudly. One retells the moment his arrow took down a charging rider. He mimics the scream. Someone claps. You force a smile. Another man throws up behind the latrines. No one says a word. You sit with your meal, some sort of barley mash with boiled bits of something that used to be meat, and eat mechanically. The texture is gritty like chewing wet canvas. You chew anyway. A horse passes by wounded but upright. Its flank is bandaged. Its eyes are distant. You recognize that look. Your hands shake a little when you drink. You remember the whistle of arrows overhead. The blur of bodies, the way one man fell backward like a puppet with its strings cut. You remember the way your own arrow hit something, someone. You don't remember if you looked away in time. The sergeant approaches later and claps your shoulder. Good aim yesterday, he says, then adds, keep it up. He walks on. Praise in this world is measured in syllables. You nod. You say nothing. You spend the afternoon helping gather firewood. It's a welcome task. No bows, no war. Just the sound of snapping twigs and the rhythm of walking. Later, by the edge of camp, you run into an older archer wrapping his wrist with cloth soaked in vinegar. Pulled it bad, he grunts. Should have loosened my grip. You nod. He tells you he's buried 5 arrows that cracked on impact. Like bones, he says. Then adds, or promises. He laughs. You don't. You help patch a section of the tent that tore in last night's wind. You sit with a boy who hasn't spoken since yesterday. You carve another spoon, your 3rd this month. You don't need it, but carving feels like control. As evening rolls in, the sky turns coppery and low. The clouds hang like smoke. You clean your bracer, sharpen your knife, count your arrows. It's almost obsessive now, the need to know, to verify, to check that something remains whole. Dinner is more stew and you barely taste it. Someone plays a lute badly. A few hum along. One archer sings a song about a woman in Norwich who could outshoot 3 men and still bake bread before dusk. You join the chorus softly, not because you believe it, but because the song knows how to end. Historians still debate the realities of medieval battle aftermaths. Were soldiers numb? Haunted, hardened? Was there ritual reverence, or did life simply resume stitched together with distraction and stew? You think it's all true. You think the aftermath is a limbo, the part where your muscles remember even if your mind wants to forget. You lie down near the fire bow beside you again. You close your eyes. You dream of arrows falling like rain, but in reverse, rising from the ground, returning to the quiver as if war could be undone by will alone. When you wake, the mud is dry, the sun is rising, and your shoulder still aches. The morning after battle smells like old leather boiled oats and smoke. Again. But the air feels different. The tension has eased just a little. No new orders, no march, no horns. Just waiting. But not the kind that knots your stomach. This is downtime, or so they call it. But rest in a medieval army camp is a flexible concept. You begin by repairing your kit. One of your arrows split clean down the shaft, so you spend an hour shaving a new one, carefully binding goose feathers in place with gut thread while trying not to glue your fingers together. You hum as you work, half out of boredom, half because it keeps your jaw from clenching. Others nearby are just as busy. One archer scrapes dried blood from his bracer, his own from a string snap. Another uses a tiny awl to re-pierce a strap on his quiver. A third sharpens bodkin points like he's planning revenge. You'd think a day without marching or shooting would be a blessing. But there's always something to do. Your bowstring is fraying again, so you twist a new one from waxed linen and carefully loop it into shape, flexing the stave gently to test tension. You try not to think about the last time it snapped mid-draw. Your left eye twitched for a week. Later, someone suggests dice. The camp's unofficial gambling den opens near the supply cart. Stakes are low buttons, thread half-rotted apples. You win a scrap of wool. You lose your flint. You enjoy none of it but stay anyway, if only to pass the time. You talk with others, about nothing, about everything. Someone says he's considering deserting if the next battle goes sideways. Another says he'll stay until his teeth fall out or his arrows run dry. A third quietly fingers a charm around his neck, wooden carved with some old symbol you don't recognize. You think about home, about the field you used to plow, about your sister's bread, which always came out lopsided but tasted like memory, about the creek where you learned to skip stones and the tree that still holds your initials. You shake the thoughts away. Camp life doesn't allow softness for long. Lunch is distributed more beans, more bread, a strange mash of vegetables and something that may have once been chicken. You eat it with grim determination. The flavor is wet twig, but it's warm. That's something. In the afternoon, you help repair a broken cartwheel, mostly by standing nearby and holding things. You don't know a lot about carts, but you do know they're heavier than they look, and more opinionated than most people. Afterward, you do laundry. Yes, laundry. You head to the stream with a handful of tunics and a block of lye soap that smells like boiled socks. You scrub each garment on a flat stone, wring them out, and hang them on a line strung between two stubborn trees. One of them drops a leaf into your eye in protest. The clothes don't get clean, but they smell slightly less like anxiety now. You count that as a win. Evening draws in slowly. You light a small fire and boil water for tea, really just herbs steeped in hope. The warmth soothes your throat. Your mind begins to quiet. Someone started whittling. You listen to the gentle scrape of blade on wood as he carves what appears to be a rabbit with far too many legs. No one corrects him. Later, a group forms near the edge of camp to share stories. Not the dramatic kind, the small ones, the ones about home. Someone tells a tale about a goose who followed him for 3 months after he fed it once. Another describes the time he mistook a noble's pet cat for a squirrel and tried to trap it. You laugh softly. You watch the stars come out one by one. No torches tonight, just starlight campfire flicker and the hush of wind threading through trees. Historians still debate the mental toll of downtime in medieval military life. Some believe it offered reprieve. Others suggest it magnified the quiet dread made warriors restless and anxious. You think the truth lies in both. Rest is needed, but it makes room for thoughts that battle chases away. You sleep early tonight not from exhaustion, but because your body's learned to take rest when it's offered like a gift you weren't sure you'd get again. Your bow leans beside you, waxed strung faithful. You close your eyes and dream not of war, but of a windless field, a silent target, and an arrow that never needs retrieving. Morning brings a drizzle, the kind that doesn't soak you outright but seeps into your bones if you stand still long enough. You shuffle from your tent cloak slung over one shoulder and find the camp humming softly. No battle today, no marching either, which means your world is about to get much stranger. Because on days like this, when there's nothing immediate to kill or clean, the other types of soldiers emerge: the camp dwellers, the support crew, the wanderers. The unofficial, barely acknowledged, and somehow always present weirdos. And you archer that you are find yourself in their midst. You start by visiting the cooks. One of them is stirring a pot with a ladle that looks suspiciously like a broken arrow shaft. He greets you with a grin and offers a taste of something thick, greenish, and steaming. "It's leeks," he says proudly. You taste it. It is not leeks. But it is hot, and that's good enough. Beside him, a second cook is carving something that might be a root vegetable or might be a dried rat. He refuses to say. You nod politely and move on. Next, the Fletchers. They sit cross-legged on damp stools surrounded by feathers and shafts, their fingers moving with the bored precision of men who've done this since they could walk. One is humming. Another talks to his tools. The third insists he once made an arrow that whistled like a banshee when fired. You ask if he still has it. He says it flew so far it never came back. You nod. You're not sure if it's a metaphor or just bad aim. Then there's the quartermaster. He's arguing with himself over inventory numbers scratched into a wax tablet. You offer a polite greeting. He asks if you've seen his ghost beans. You have not. He mutters about shortages, then hands you a length of rope and tells you to return it when the moon tells you. You decide not to question that. Further on, you pass the barber surgeon. He's outside today, sharpening blades and telling stories. He says he once removed a broken arrow from a man's chest with a spoon and a prayer. He gestures to his tools, proudly one of which is absolutely a repurposed fish hook. You ask about the prayer. He winks and says it involved onions. You keep walking. Then you meet one of the mercenaries. They're not part of your unit. Not even part of your country most days. But they're here paid in coin and given vague promises of loot. This one's from somewhere colder. Thick accent, thicker beard. He sits sharpening a sword that hums softly against the stone. He offers you a drink from a leather flask. It smells like punishment. You sip. It tastes like a Buddha barn fire and a bad decision all in one. You nod in appreciation. He smiles. Good, eh? You don't answer. Mostly because your mouth has gone numb. Nearby, a camp follower plays a tune on a battered flute. It's oddly beautiful, rising above the clatter and coughs, threading through tents like something ancient and untouchable. People pause to listen. Even the mercenary hums. Not all the weird is bad. You spend the rest of the afternoon in small talk. A washerwoman tells you about her dream of opening a pie stall in York. A farrier swears he once shot a demon's horse. A boy offers to trade you a map. to treasure drawn on sheep vellum. You give him a dried apple. He gives you directions to a mud puddle shaped vaguely like a chicken. You call it even. Later by the fireside, the stories begin. Someone talks about a ghost that haunts the archer's tent. Only appears to those who've lost more arrows than they brought. You glance at your quiver just in case. Someone else claims to have seen a dragon in the northern hills. Big as a church, they say. Smelled like sulfur and sin. You ask what it was doing. Looking disappointed comes the answer. You sip stew slowly. This batch tastes more like leeks. Progress. Historians still argue about the true makeup of medieval camps. How many support roles existed? How structured they were? How many were just people? People who followed the war because it offered food or purpose, or because they didn't know where else to go. What's clear is this: it wasn't just soldiers. It was everyone. The man who sharpened your arrows. The woman who patched your hose. The boy who could juggle with rocks and still make you laugh. And all of them mattered. Because without them, the army wouldn't march. Wouldn't shoot, wouldn't eat, wouldn't function. You lay down that night not thinking of war or training or targets, but of people. All strange, all broken, all singing the same sad, stubborn tune in a dozen different voices. You drift to sleep with that tune in your ears, and a full belly, and a borrowed rope, which you still don't know how to return to the moon. You've barely finished scraping breakfast from your wooden bowl when the sergeant appears, arms crossed, brow furrowed. That look doesn't usually mean good news. He says, nodding at you like he's been waiting for this moment. You're promoted. You blink, chew, swallow. Promoted to what exactly, you ask? Captain of archers. There's a beat. Someone nearby snorts into their stew. You wait for the punchline. It never comes. And just like that, you're a captain now. No ceremony. No fancy cloak. No dramatic horn. Just a new responsibility and a slightly more accusatory stare from your comrades. At first you think it might be a reward, recognition, prestige. Then the reality sets in. You're still sleeping on straw. Still eating questionable vegetables. Still wearing the same tunic that smells like boiled regret. Only now you're responsible for others too. You gather your unit. 15 archers of varying age, temperament, and elbow discipline. They look at you with the blank expressions of men wondering if this means fewer chores or more yelling. Spoiler, it's more yelling. Your first duty inventory. You're handed a charcoal stub and a list that's been wet 3 times and rewritten in 3 different handwritings. You spend an hour counting arrows, bows, quivers, bracers, and something labeled miscellaneous binding twine. You don't know what that means. You count it anyway. Then comes the drill schedule. You must now enforce it. You tell them to line up. You tell them to draw. You correct stances. You offer encouragement that feels forced and receive glares that feel personal. You shout hold. No one listens. You shout it again louder. They start listening. Then one looses early. You glare. He shrugs. You mark his name on the back of your hand with charcoal. He sees you do it. Your shoulder aches, not from the bow, from the stress. During a break, a veteran named Merrick sidles up. He's missing part of his left ear and smells faintly of ale-soaked rope. You're doing all right, he says. You raise an eyebrow. Better than the last captain. He cried on day 2. You're only twitching. Encouraging. Afternoon brings more problems. Someone's bowstring snapped and slapped his cheek. He blames the string. You blame the fact he left it strung in the rain. Another claims his arrows are cursed. You consider nodding just to end the conversation faster. A third asks for permission to marry the washerwoman. You ask what that has to do with archery. He shrugs. You tell him to ask her first. You're pulled aside by a supply runner who insists you sign for a shipment of arrows that never arrived. You write invisible next to the entry. He's not amused. Later during another drill, you catch one of your lads napping behind a hay bale. He claims he was meditating. You assign him to firewood duty. He glares. You remind him you didn't pick this job either. That night you sit by the fire, utterly drained. Being a captain doesn't mean you shoot more. It means you yell more. It means you answer for everything from lost arrows to bad soup. It means knowing that if someone breaks rank in battle, it's your name they'll mutter. And yet, there's pride too. When your unit hits the target in a perfect volley when they listen, when they stop asking if every missing item is haunted, you feel it. Not victory, but progress. Historians still debate the responsibilities of medieval archer captains. Were they true commanders or just glorified babysitters? You suspect it's both. You chew your bread slowly. Watch your men clean their gear. Hear one of them laugh, really laugh for the first time in days. You smile just a little. Because maybe this isn't about shouting. It's about holding the line when no one else will, and teaching others to stand with you, even if they're cursed. Especially then. The first mistake is minor, a missing arrow. One of your men claims it simply vanished during practice. Slipped into the wind, he says, which is not a helpful answer. You raise an eyebrow. You don't say anything yet. But your captain sensed the one that developed about 5 minutes after getting promoted starts to itch. The second mistake is harder to ignore a man caught asleep during sentry duty. That's a serious offense. Not just dangerous, but deadly if someone decides to take advantage of it. You handle it quietly, a tongue lashing a demotion to latrine duty and a reminder that closing one eye for just a moment is not a valid defense. Still, your patience wears thinner. Then comes the big one. A rumor spreads through the camp someone's been selling arrows to a nearby village in exchange for wine. Not just trading, but pilfering from stores one shaft at a time. The sergeant calls you in. Sort it, he says. No suggestion, no instructions. Just that word, sort. You gather your men, your new captain's voice still rough around the edges. You speak slowly, calmly. You ask for honesty. No one confesses. So you check gear. Every man, every quiver, every pouch. And there it is, 2 arrows too few in one man's roll. No name on them, of course. But the wrappings match the camp Fletcher's work, and the man's tunic smells faintly of sour wine. You pull him aside. He stammers, blames a mistake, a mix-up. He didn't mean to. You don't shout. You take him to the quartermaster and hand him over. The punishment? It starts with extra duties, digging trenches, hauling stones. Then comes the shaming. A shaved head, a wooden collar, a sign hung around his neck. I traded the king's arrows for wine. He walks through camp with it, shoulders hunched. No one speaks to him. The message is clear. Then there's the boy who smuggled bread from the kitchen and tried to hide it in his boot. You catch him when a trail of crumbs gives him away like a fairy tale gone wrong. He's hungry. You get it. You sneak him an extra bit of stew later behind the tent. Then you assign him to carry water all day. Actions have consequences. So does mercy. But the punishments don't stop there. You hear of another unit where a man lost his bow and lied about it. They tied him to the gatepost for half a day, arms outstretched, as if holding an imaginary weapon. The message, lose your bow and you might as well lose your hands. Discipline here isn't subtle. You see a man cleaning the latrines with a rag tied to a stick. He swears under his breath and mutters about a stolen spoon. You do not ask. There are rumors, too, of archers who fled battle and were branded, of deserters caught and strung up by their own bowstrings, of one man who was made to carry a rock the size of a pig for 3 days straight. When asked why, he just whispered, "I dropped my bracer in the king's stew." Historians still argue whether these punishments were standard or exaggerated tales passed around to scare green recruits. But you've seen enough to know some are real, maybe not all, but enough. Still, not everything is harsh. Sometimes punishment is just running laps until your legs wobble. Sometimes it's scrubbing the latrine trench until the smell replaces your dreams. Sometimes it's being assigned to sharpen everyone's arrows until your fingers go numb. You once had to recite the archer's prayer 50 times while standing in a bucket. Why the bucket you still don't know, but there's a rhythm to it all. A strange fairness. Rules are rules. They keep chaos at bay. They remind everyone that even in war some things matter. Honesty, loyalty, showing up on time with your quiver full. And so as captain you enforce them, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you'd rather look the other way. Because in this world, discipline isn't about control. It's about trust. You lie awake that night listening to the wind rattle the tent flap. You think about the man who sold arrows for wine, about the boy with crumbs in his boot, about how easy it would be to become any of them on the wrong day with the wrong luck. You grip your bow beside you, just to feel its weight, just to remember who you are. And just before you drift off, you whisper the archer's promise. Never miss without cause. Never strike without need. Never lose an arrow to folly. It's not in any official book, but it's one you plan to keep. The morning sun rises slow and gold over a quiet field. No shouting, no marching, no distant horns today. You're not preparing for war. You're preparing for something stranger. A festival. Yes, even archers get the occasional reprieve. Today, the village just beyond the ridge is hosting a feast day. There'll be bread, music, meat if you're lucky, and more relevantly, an archery contest. You've been strongly encouraged to represent your unit, which is a polite way of saying go impress the locals and don't start a fire. You walk to the village with your bow slung low and a small crowd of off-duty soldiers in tow. The villagers greet you with wary smiles and a table full of pastries that you eye like a starving fox. One woman pushes a honey cake into your hands. You thank her with the enthusiasm of a man who hasn't eaten sugar since last midsummer. The field has been cleared, a rough line of targets painted on wood planks. Some are old doors. One looks suspiciously like a wine barrel, but the distance is fair, and your bow feels good in your hand. The contest begins. Each archer takes turns. The rules are simple: 3 arrows. Closest to the center wins. You draw back slowly, aware of the crowd. Villagers whisper. Someone hums. You let the arrow fly. Thwack, just off center. Not bad, but not winning. You loose another, better. And the third, dead center. The crowd lets out a collective hum of approval. A few children cheer. One of your fellow archers slaps your back so hard you nearly bite your tongue. You win a small sack of flour and a carved wooden spoon. It's possibly the most valuable thing you've earned in weeks. But the competition isn't everything. Later, there's a demonstration trick shots. An older archer balances a clay jug on a post and shoots it clean through the middle. You try splitting a hanging apple. You miss the first, hit the second. The crowd applauds. You bow dramatically. For a moment, you're not a soldier, you're a performer, a symbol, proof that war can have skill, that strength can have grace. A boy asks to see your bow. You let him hold it. He nearly topples over from the weight. His eyes go wide. How do you do this, he asks. You smile, with sore fingers and a bad back. He doesn't get the joke, but his father does. You stay for the feast. There's music played on pipes and drums, dances around a maypole. 2 men attempt to race while carrying sheep. The sheep are not amused. You eat roast meat until your stomach protests. You drink spiced cider until your knees feel too relaxed to stand. Someone offers you a flower crown. You wear it without shame. Historians still argue about the role of archers in public festivals. Were they revered for their skills? Feared for their violence? You think the answer is both and more. Because today you're not just a tool of war. You're part of something human. The children ask you to shoot again. This time you fire at a target painted like a smiling pig. You hit it right in the snout. They cheer. Even the pigs seem impressed. Later, as the sun sets, you sit beside the village bonfire. The heat kisses your boots. The smoke curls lazily skyward. You're handed a mug of cider and a roasted apple. You eat it slowly, you close your eyes, you listen to laughter, to music, to life. You almost forget the mud, the drills, the fear. Almost. Because even here with your spoon prize tucked in your belt and a flower crown sliding over one ear, you know this moment is rare. Tomorrow you may march again. Tomorrow arrows may mean something else entirely. But tonight they mean applause. They mean balance and breath and the satisfying sound of wood splitting just right. You fall asleep beneath the stars, your bow beside you, the scent of roasted meat still clinging to your tunic. And in your dream, you're still on the field, still drawing, still aiming, still hearing the crowd hold its breath. It begins with a familiar twinge in your shoulder as you sit up, then a sharp pinch in your lower back as you stand, and finally a chorus of creaks from knees and fingers that sound like a dozen miniature cartwheels groaning in protest. Today your body has finally submitted its formal complaint, and you poor archer are going to have to do something about it. Injury isn't a dramatic affair in your life. It creeps in. A strained tendon here, a swollen knuckle there, a neck that clicks every time you turn too fast. You've been holding off mentioning it. Archers aren't known for complaints. But your bow arm trembles now, and that's a whisper you can't ignore. So you head to the surgeon's corner again. He's whistling cheerfully while boiling something in a pot that smells like onions and horse sweat. Shoulder again, he says without looking. You nod. Still pulling too much weight for someone with a spine made of wet wood. You grunt. He gestures to a stool. You sit. This time it's a poultice. Thick, sticky warm. He slathers it onto your shoulder, muttering about humors and the phases of the moon. It smells like boiled dandelions and regret. You'll want to rest it, he says. You laugh. Not because it's funny, but because rest isn't an option. Not really. I said want, he repeats. He wraps your shoulder in cloth and gives you a small vial of oil, something herbal steeped in vinegar. Rub it in twice a day, unless you want to lose that arm. Encouraging. Later, you soak your hands in warm water steeped with thyme. Your fingers crackle like a fire. You wince as you flex them. The calluses have thickened, sure, but beneath them, everything feels raw. Someone offers you a remedy stale beer. Not to drink, to soak your feet in. It draws out the poison, he says. You try it. It mostly makes your feet smell like failure. Back at camp, you're given lighter duties for the day. You help sort arrows, organize supplies, clean tools, but your body still rebels. Kneeling awful, lifting worse. You start to notice how others move too. The slight limp in Merrick's stride. The way Joss favors his left hand now. The younger lads with wide eyes and straight backs haven't been here long. They still believe they'll come home unchanged. You used to believe that too. In the evening, you wrap your shoulder again, rub in the oil, sip a warm broth, and sit by the fire. Someone jokes about the archer's stoop, how you can spot one even out of uniform. Shoulders like a barn door, back like a question mark. You laugh. You're one of them now. There's talk of a man in another unit who popped his collarbone drawing a bow too fast. Another who slipped on ice mid-shot and ended up with an arrow through his own boot. You wince at that one. Historians still debate how chronic injuries affected the longbow corps, how many were benched, how many kept fighting through pain, how many simply disappeared into other roles. There's little record of rest days or recovery, but your body knows the truth. This job wears you down. You stretch before bed, slowly, carefully. A few others join in. You all look ridiculous, like stiff puppets miming birds, but it helps. Someone suggests a salve made from crushed nettles. Someone else says if you sleep on your right side with a rock under your hip, your shoulder heals faster. You try neither. Instead, you lie down with your bow beside you. Arm bandaged, joints aching, and one thought in your head. You'd do it again tomorrow, even with the pain. because the draw is part of who you are now. Not just the physical one, but the draw to something bigger. A cause, a brotherhood, a rhythm. You close your eyes and dream of pulling the string once more, this time without flinching. The road home isn't paved with glory. It's packed with mud rocks and the bitter realization that your favorite spoon went missing somewhere near the last campfire. You limp more than walk now, your shoulders still wrapped, and your bow faithful scarred is lashed securely to your pack, like a sleeping animal that might wake if jostled. After weeks of marching, training, fighting, and not quite dying, you've been released. Temporarily. Your service is over for now, or at least until someone with a crown and a grievance calls again. So you walk, past the streams where you once drank your own reflection, past the hedgerows where arrows once landed and children now play, past towns that offer you nods and bread crusts and a wide berth, as if the war still clings to your skin. The first step into your village feels oddly theatrical. No fanfare, of course. Just your feet finding familiar dirt and your nose catching the scent of wet hay, wood smoke, and turnips. Always turnips. You pass old faces, some brighter, some older, some pretending not to see you. Your sister finds you first, wraps you in a hug that crushes every bruise but feels like medicine. She asks how you are. You say tired. She nods. That's enough. The house is smaller than you remembered, the hearth lower, the stool wobblier, but the roof is still mostly attached and the bread is warm, and for a moment it feels like the world didn't shift while you were away. You sit. You eat. You sleep a sleep that isn't interrupted by shouting smoke or the need to count arrows. And then it's morning, and your body loyal to the end wakes early. You step outside and stretch. Your shoulder complains, your knees crackle, but there's quiet here. Honest quiet. No orders. No drills. Just birdsong. The distant clank of a pot. Someone calling to a goat. You help in the fields. Plow a bit. Hoe a crooked line? Pretend to know what you're doing. Your hands once made for bowstrings fumble with farm tools. The hoe feels awkward. The soil feels unfamiliar. You laugh at yourself and try again. Later, the village boys ask to see your bow. You show them carefully. You let them feel the tension, explain the difference between broadhead and bodkin. One asks if you killed anyone. You don't answer. He doesn't ask again. You walk the old paths, past the creek where the stones still remember your childhood feet, past the tree with the initials carved into it. You trace the grooves and whisper your own name just to hear it in a place that never changed. At the village tavern, someone buys you a drink. You sip slowly. The room quiets. They ask what war was like. You say wet, loud, cold. They wait for more. You say nothing else. They nod satisfied, or at least too polite to press. That night, lying under a patched wool blanket, you think of your bow. You've hung it above the hearth, near the cooking spoons. It looks strange there. Domestic, but somehow right. Historians often gloss over this part, the return. The awkward re-entry into a world that no longer fits quite the same. They study the battles, the formations, the weapons. Not the way your neighbor's cart sounds louder now. Not the way a sparrow's wing beat makes your hand twitch. They don't talk about the distance that lingers between you and the ones who never left, or the way bread tastes sweeter than it should, or the quiet thrill of a fire that doesn't need to be watched for enemy sparks. You lie in the dark, and you wonder, will they call you back? Probably. Would you go? Also probably. But not tonight. Tonight you sleep with turnips in the air and silence in your ears. Your body still bruised. Your spirit only slightly less so. But home. It's a week before you finally admit it. You miss the sound of arrows slicing air. You miss the rhythm. Not the war, not the waiting, not the stew that tasted like boiled cloth, but the ritual of it. The draw, the release, the quiet certainty of a fletched shaft leaving your fingers and vanishing toward a target you no longer had to think about. So you take your bow down from the wall. It creaks when you unstring it. The wood's stiff from rest like your back after a night on that lumpy straw mattress. You oil it gently, whispering apologies to the stave for neglecting it. The string hums a soft, familiar tune when tightened. Your fingers remember where to place themselves. You walk to the field outside the village, the one where you used to pretend to be a knight, where your first practice arrow vanished forever in the tall grass. You set up a crude target, just a stack of straw wrapped in a tunic too worn to mend and step back. You draw. The tension feels wrong at first, too much, then too little. Your shoulder protest, your wrist shivers slightly, but your fingers find their place. You loose. The arrow thuds into the outer ring of straw. Not great, not terrible. You smile. You try again, and again. After half an hour, your back's aching, your fingers are red, and your aim is still drifting right. But you're lighter, breathing more fully, whole in a way you haven't felt since before the last march. That night you sit by the hearth with your sister. She knits. You mend an arrow fletching. There's no need to really, but your hands want to move. You're staying, she asks softly. You nod. For now. But the truth is slippery, because even now the thoughts creep back in. You think of the younger lads, of Merrick, of Joss, of the ones who didn't come home. You think of the village girl who sent letters to a name scratched into a bracer. You never told her he wouldn't read them. You think of the sound of war horses at dawn, of the rush of an arrow storm, of the way silence falls after the last shaft lands. Could you do this again? You ask yourself while repairing a frayed bowstring. Could you lift that weight again? Rise before dawn. March into wet, hungry places with only barley in your belly and hope in your quiver. Could you listen to another sergeant bark orders? Another friend make jokes over weak ale? Could you aim steady with a crowd shouting with your breath caught in your throat with the sky thick with steel? Could you bury another name? You don't answer right away, because the question isn't whether you could do it again. It's whether you ever really left. Your back is straighter now. You walk with a slight lean, not from the bow's pull, but from muscle memory. You still tie your belt the same way. Still count arrows without thinking. Still flinch sometimes at thunder that sounds too much like a distant volley. The war is not behind you. It walks beside you now, quieter, but there. And maybe, just maybe, you'd go again. Not for glory. Not even for coin. But for the men who'll need someone steady on the line. Someone who's already done the hard draw. Someone who knows what it costs. And what it gives. You sit by your fire spoon and hand bowl full of decent stew and stare at your bow. Not with fear, with familiarity. And the quiet understanding that some burdens become part of you. You don't have to carry them, but sometimes you choose to. The moon is high, soft as milk, and the air is still. You lie on your straw mattress, the blanket tugged to your chin. Your bow leaned in its usual spot near the door, as familiar as your own hands. You breathe slowly, feeling the quiet settle over you like a second blanket. You've made it. Not just through the day, but through everything before it, through the mud. The march, the chaos of the line, the long ache in your shoulder that still hums when you shift too quickly. Through hunger, through training, through orders barked too loud and silences held too long. You've made it. You think back, the day you first held the bow. Too big, too heavy, too stiff. You were smaller then, not just in body, but in certainty, in the shape of your thoughts, in how far forward you could see. You remember the drills, the endless, exhausting repetition, the bruises that turned green and purple, then faded into tougher skin, the way your fingers thickened, the way your spine learned to bend without breaking. You remember the people. Merrick with his half-ear and terrible singing voice, Joss with her lopsided grin and the fastest draw you'd ever seen. The boys who grew into men in the space between volleys. The men who didn't come back. You remember the firelight, the games, the quiet nights where the wind told stories older than kings. And you remember that first arrow that found its mark. The way your breath caught, the way the world hushed for just a moment. You're not the same person who set out. You're slower now in the mornings. You groan when you stand. You wince when it rains. But you know yourself in ways you didn't before. You've drawn the bow in battle. You've held your line in the face of panic. You've cleaned your own blood off your gear and stitched your own tunic with hands that trembled. And still you sleep with your bow beside you. Not out of fear, but out of habit, out of affection, out of the quiet companionship that only comes from something that's seen you at your worst and still works when you call on it. You've stood in the mud and in the mist. You've eaten from pots that could dissolve steel. You've been mocked, praised, ignored, honored. And through it all, you drew the bow. You aimed. You loosed. Again and again. Because someone had to. And now it's quiet. Now no one is calling for volleys. No one is shouting for ranks or calling out your name in alarm or glory. Now it's just the crickets outside the warmth of the hearth, fading into the walls, the tick of the cooling firewood as it settles, and the familiar weight of your own breathing. The hardest part wasn't the march. It wasn't the battle. It wasn't even the aftermath. The hardest part was becoming someone who could do it and not forget who they were before. And you've done that. You survived the draw. You survived the wait. You survived the silence that came after. So breathe, Archer. Let the aches sink into the straw beneath you. Let your shoulders finally truly rest. You've earned it. And tomorrow you may rise again if duty calls. But tonight you sleep. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.